Welcome to True Echo, where every story echoes louder than words. Today's story takes us to a quiet diner in Bakersfield, where an old black veteran just wanted a slice of pie, but instead, he was mocked by three young men with loud mouths and no sense of history. What happened next didn't just silence a room, it taught an entire town the meaning of honor, humility, and what real strength looks like. Stay with us. The morning sun had just begun warming the streets of Bakersfield, California, casting long, sleepy shadows over the sidewalks. At the corner of 19th and H Street, Lou's Diner hummed quietly to life, like it had every day for the last 30 years. It was a simple place, tucked between a tired laundromat and a shuttered hardware store. The sign out front flickered stubbornly, half-lit and barely legible. But it didn't matter. People came anyway. They came for the pancakes, sure. But more than that, they came for the feeling, the familiarity. It smelled of bacon grease and biscuits and old coffee. The booths were patched with duct tape, the wallpaper was yellowed, and the American flag hanging behind the register was sun-faded and crooked. But no one cared. Because every Sunday, between 8 and 10 a.m. sharp, Eugene Marshall walked through those doors like clockwork. Eugene didn't make much noise when he entered. No grand entrance, no greetings shouted across the room. Just a slight nod, a soft, "Morning, Lou," even though Lou hadn't owned the place in over a decade. The staff never corrected him. They liked the ritual of it. Like Eugene was the diner's heartbeat. He always took the same booth, second one by the window. Close enough to feel the morning light but far enough to be left alone. He wore an old army jacket, olive drab, faded, frayed at the cuffs. On the back, just under the collar, was a barely legible patch, 101st. The Screaming Eagles. Some people thought he wore it to be noticed. The truth was simpler. It was the only thing he owned that still fit like it used to. And the only thing he couldn't bring himself to throw away. The staff didn't offer him a menu. They didn't have to. They knew what he wanted: black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and a slice of apple pie, burnt just slightly at the edges. Luis Camargo, the owner's 26-year-old son, always slipped in a little extra apple filling when he plated it. Said it was because Eugene reminded him of the grandfather he'd never met. Eugene always responded the same way: "If your kitchen had legs, I'd marry it." The regulars knew to give him space. The newcomers learned quickly. Eugene didn't demand attention, but somehow he commanded it anyway, with silence, with steadiness, with the kind of presence that made you sit up straighter just being near him. But that particular Sunday, something was off. Not with Eugene, but with the world outside. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was something deeper. Luis peeked through the kitchen window and smiled as Eugene sat in his usual booth. He slid the pie into the oven to warm, then turned to refill the coffee pot. The bell above the diner door rang loud and fast. Three young men strutted inside like they owned the place: Troy Delaney, Reggie Finn, and Darnell Holmes. Early 20s. Loud sneakers, louder voices. Bluetooth speaker clipped to Troy's hip, blaring music no one wanted to hear. They were the kind of guys who lived for attention. Who fed on it. They scanned the room, laughing too loud, daring someone to challenge them. "Yo," Troy said, pointing toward Eugene, "check out Grandpa G.I. Joe. Probably stormed Normandy with a cane." Reggie doubled over. "Man probably thinks this place still takes war rations." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room, the kind of laughter that came more from fear than humor. But Eugene didn't flinch. He stirred his coffee. Took a slow sip. The cup didn't even rattle in his hand. Luis watched from the kitchen. His stomach clenched. The three young men swaggered closer to Eugene's booth. Troy leaned one hand on the table, his smirk wide. "Hey Pops, what's with the army costume? You playing dress-up this morning?" Reggie snorted. "Tell us a story, old man. You wrestle Hitler or just polish the tanks?" Darnell hung back by the jukebox, pretending not to be involved, but his eyes were on the scene, calculating. Eugene looked up. Calm. Clear. The kind of calm that made people uneasy. "You boys got nothing better to do?" he asked. Troy laughed. "Freedom of speech, right, soldier?" That's when Luis pushed through the kitchen door. He didn't say anything, not yet. Just walked around the counter, his face tight, jaw clenched. Eugene folded his napkin slowly and set it beside his plate. His movements were precise, almost delicate. He looked at the boys like a teacher watching kids dig their own grave in the sandbox. "You get your laughs messing with old folks?" he asked. "Nah," Reggie said, stepping closer. "Just wondering why you still wear that dusty-arse jacket like it means something." Someone behind them muttered under their breath, "It does mean something." Troy turned. "What was that?" Nobody answered. Darnell chuckled. "Man's just some old vet stuck in the past. Let it go." Reggie tapped the table. "What's the matter, old man? Got war flashbacks? Wanna cry into your pie?" Luis stepped up beside Eugene's booth. His voice was low but hard. "That's enough." Troy turned, smirking. "Who are you? His grandson?" Luis didn't answer. Instead, he looked at all three men. Slowly. "Do you know who this is?" he asked. The laughter stopped. "What, like he's a celebrity?" Reggie scoffed. Luis turned to Eugene. "You want me to tell them?" Eugene shook his head. "Let them talk. Sometimes ignorance needs an audience before it can embarrass itself." The room grew quiet. And that's when everything started to shift. Luis didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The stillness around Eugene's booth was already enough to choke the swagger out of the air. You could hear forks settle, coffee cup stop mid-lift. Marcy, the head waitress, didn't say a word, but her knuckles were white around the pot she was holding. She'd worked there 32 years. She knew how this kind of moment could go sideways. Reggie was still grinning, but it didn't reach his eyes anymore. Troy glanced at the diners around him, heads were turning, eyes narrowing. That invisible tide, the one that decides who's got the room on their side. It had shifted. And not in his favor. Luis took one step closer, standing squarely between Eugene and the three men. "You boys want to clown, go outside," he said. "But you don't come in here and disrespect this man. Not here. Not today." "Why?" Troy fired back, but the smirk had lost its teeth. "Because he's wearing some crusty old jacket?" "No," said a voice from the corner booth. Everyone turned. It was a man in his late 60s with a weathered face and a cane leaning against his table. He stood up slowly, like every movement came with a cost. His voice was rough, but steady. "Because that man pulled my cousin out of a burning helicopter in 1970. Carried him through the jungle on his back. He died 3 weeks later, but not before riding home. Said he didn't die scared. Said there was someone with him. That someone was Eugene Marshall." A few people gasped quietly. Troy looked like he wanted to laugh it off, but nothing came out. Not a chuckle. Not a word. And then another voice joined in. "My uncle too," said a woman sitting at the counter. "He never talked about the war, ever. But he talked about Eugene. Said he never met a man with steadier hands." Reggie shifted, uncomfortable. Darnell leaned heavier into the jukebox, suddenly a lot less interested in pretending he wasn't part of it. Luis kept his eyes on the three. "Still think it's just a costume?" he asked. Troy opened his mouth but closed it again. Eugene finally looked up. His gaze landed squarely on Troy. "You ever been shot at, son?" he asked. "Ever held a friend while he bled out, crying for his mama? Ever dragged a man through mud with half your leg torn open, praying you both make it." Troy's lips parted slightly. He shook his head. "Didn't think so," Eugene said. He turned back to his coffee, took a sip like he hadn't just spoken a truth sharp enough to silence a bar fight. Luis folded his arms. "You came in here looking for attention. Now you've got it." It was Reggie who broke the silence. "Man, you making this real dramatic." Marcy snapped her towel against the counter. "It is dramatic. It's life. You wouldn't last 10 minutes in this man's boots." And then, as if the walls themselves had something to say, a new voice came from the kitchen. Ramon Espinoza, the cook. He stepped out, apron still dusted with flour, arms crossed over his chest. "You like baseball?" he asked bluntly, looking at Reggie. Reggie blinked. "Yeah. So? You know Vernon Dorsey?" "Yeah, pitcher from Stockdale High. Legend. Got drafted." Ramon nodded once. "He was my cousin. Went to Vietnam. Never came back. A landmine shredded him. Eugene carried what was left of him to the medic tent. Wrote us a letter. Held his hand while he died. Nobody dared breathe. That letter," Ramon continued, "my uncle kept it in his Bible until the day he died. We still have it." Troy looked like he wanted the floor to open up beneath him. His bravado was bleeding out fast, replaced by something else entirely, guilt. Marcy's voice broke the silence again. "You mocked a man who's already lived through more than you'll ever face. And you did it because it was easy. Because no one ever taught you better." Darnell finally stepped forward. "All right," he muttered. "He's a vet. He went through stuff. That don't mean he's untouchable." Eugene didn't react. He didn't have to. Because now, the entire diner was against them. And the story wasn't even halfway done. Luis looked at Darnell, then Reggie, then Troy. "You want to know what that jacket means?" he said. "It means sacrifice. It means pain. And it means the man wearing it deserves better than your mouth." Reggie shifted, his voice a little softer. "We didn't know all that, man." Luis shook his head. "You didn't care to ask." And just as things seemed to settle, a woman from the far booth stood. Her scarf was bright. Leopard print. Her eyes were sharp as glass. "He had a wife," she said. "Her name was Margaret." Eugene looked down. Silent. "She used to come in with him. Sweetest woman I ever met. Worked nights while he was overseas. Saved up to surprise him when he got home." A pause. "She died the day before he returned. Car accident. He didn't even know she was gone until he stepped off the bus." Gasps rippled across the room. Even Darnell looked shaken now. "We picked a name," Eugene said softly, still not raising his eyes. "Jordan. Girl or boy. We didn't care." He sighed, the sound like wind brushing gravel. "I missed the funeral by 3 hours. The whole diner went still. Not a fork moved. Not a whisper passed." Troy swallowed. I didn't know." Eugene finally looked at him. "No," he said. "You didn't. You didn't want to." Troy stood frozen, his eyes locked with Eugene's. No longer defiant. No longer cocky. Just a young man realizing, maybe for the first time in his life, what true loss looked like. And how loud silence could be when the room no longer laughed with you. Reggie stepped back from the table, his hands now at his sides. His eyes darted toward the door, then back at Eugene. "We were just messing around," he mumbled. "Didn't mean it like that." Eugene gave the faintest nod, not in agreement, but in understanding, not of their words, but of their ignorance. "I fought so people could speak freely," he said, his voice low, level. "But I didn't fight so they could forget the cost. That line hit the diner like a gut punch. Even Darnell, still wearing his sunglasses, shifted uncomfortably. He took them off slowly and folded them into the collar of his shirt. When he finally looked up, his eyes weren't hard anymore, just tired. "You're right," he said quietly. "We didn't know. We were being dumb. All of us." Eugene looked at the three of them. "Being dumb is forgivable," he said. "Staying that way? That's a choice." Luis stepped forward again. "You boys wanted attention. You got it. But now that the spotlight's on you, what are you going to do with it?" Troy opened his mouth. Closed it again. His throat bobbed with a swallow that seemed stuck. Before he could answer, a voice from the far booth, the old man with the crutches, called out, "You didn't know because you never thought to ask. That's the problem." The woman with the leopard scarf added, "You're lucky. You grew up in a world where people like Eugene made it safer for you to act like fools." Reggie's shoulders sagged. "We were just trying to have fun," he said, but the words rang hollow. Eugene looked up. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't even disappointed. It was something heavier, the weight of decades. Of being misunderstood. Of watching people like these boys come and go, full of heat and wind, never stopping to see who they passed on the road. "I've worn this jacket for over 50 years, Eugene said. "Not because it's comfortable. Not because I want anyone's praise. But because every time I look at it, I remember the men who never got to take theirs off." He leaned back slightly, resting his hands flat on the table. His coffee had gone cold again, but he didn't reach for it. He was too far in the moment to care. "You see patches and old fabric," he continued. "I see names. Faces. Blood in the dirt. Screams in the trees. I see brothers who never came home." A hush swept through the room like a wave. No one moved. No one dared. That's when Luis, still standing beside the booth, looked down at Eugene. "Should I tell them about the photo?" Eugene gave a slow shake of his head. "They wouldn't understand it anyway." Troy's voice cracked. "What photo?" Luis hesitated. The air was still. Too still. "There's a picture," he said. "It's in my dad's safe. From '72. Shows Eugene carrying a kid through a burning village. Barefoot. Covered in blood. Eugene's face is calm, not angry, not scared, just focused. He looked at the boys again. "That kid was my uncle." A long pause followed. "You saved his life," Luis said. Eugene didn't respond. He didn't need to. "The kid grew up," Luis added. "Had a family. That includes me. So when you laugh at this man, when you call him a joke, you're mocking the man who made my existence possible." The weight of the words finally landed. Reggie whispered, "Damn." Marcy came out from behind the counter with a fresh cup of coffee. She placed it in front of Eugene gently, then put her hand on his shoulder. She didn't speak, just offered silent comfort the way only people who've been through their own wars know how. Eugene didn't say thank you. He just touched her hand for a second before she turned and walked back. Troy looked back at the door. I didn't mean it like that." "No one ever does," the old man with the crutches said. "That's the problem. Disrespect never starts with a sign that says, 'I'm about to be cruel.' It starts with a joke. A look. A whisper. Then it becomes something bigger. Something that sticks." The teenage girl in the hoodie who'd been silent the entire time suddenly stood up from the back booth. She pulled a small notebook from her bag and walked slowly to Eugene's table. Would you mind writing your name?" she asked, holding it out. "I just want to remember it." Eugene blinked, surprised. He took the notebook. Flipped it open gently. Took Marcy's pen and wrote in neat, careful script. Eugene Marshall, Infantry, 101st Airborne Division. He handed it back. The girl held it to her chest like it was a family heirloom and walked back without another word. Something shifted then. Something bigger than silence. The air didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt reverent. Respect had returned to Lou's diner, and this time, it wasn't quiet. It pulsed. It stayed. Troy finally spoke again. "I'm sorry," he said. "I mean it." Eugene studied him for a long time. His eyes didn't waver. "Don't say sorry because you got caught," he said. "Say it because you plan to carry the truth with you after you walk out that door." Troy's lip trembled. He gave a solemn nod. Behind him, Reggie and Darnell looked down, clearly shaken. Luis exhaled. "You boys came in here to tear someone down," he said. "But you walked into a wall you didn't see coming. This man. He doesn't need to shout to be heard. He just needs to sit still long enough for the world to remember who built the ground they're standing on." And in that moment, no one disagreed. Not even the boys who walked in laughing. By now, every soul inside Lou's diner knew this morning wasn't going to be forgotten. Not today. Not ever. People had started putting down their utensils altogether, not because they were finished eating, but because eating felt wrong during a moment like this. Troy, Reggie, and Darnell didn't look like punks anymore. They looked like kids who'd walked into a storm wearing flip-flops, unprepared, exposed, humbled. Luis glanced around the room. "You wanted to show off," he said to them. "You got loud. Thought no one would say anything. Maybe that's what you're used to. But this isn't that kind of place." Reggie nodded slowly. "We didn't know about any of it." Luis didn't blink. "You didn't want to know. That's different." The weight in the room had changed again. The anger was gone. But in its place was something harder to ignore: consequence. Eugene, who had barely touched his pie since the boys walked in, finally leaned forward. He spoke with the calm of someone who had seen too much to waste breath. "You ever wonder what it's like when a man comes home from hell, and gets spit on?" he said. The question was rhetorical. But it landed like a hammer. You ever walk into a store and have the clerk follow you because of your skin? Ever wear the same boots and jacket you fought in, and be told to leave the restaurant because you don't look right to the customers? His voice didn't shake. That made it worse. "I didn't expect a parade when I came back in '72. I'd seen too much for that. But I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd find peace." He looked at Troy, whose head was down now. "You think I wear this jacket for clout? I wear it because it's the only thing that didn't leave me. My country didn't give me a job. Didn't offer a home loan. Didn't even give me a kind word at the bus station. It gave me silence. Indifference." Marcy, now standing beside the counter, wiped her eyes with a napkin. She wasn't alone. Even the cook, Ramon, had stepped out again, his arms folded across his chest, jaw clenched like he was holding something in. "And through it all," Eugene said, "I chose not to become bitter. I chose to sit in this booth, eat my pie, drink my coffee, and smile at strangers who sometimes crossed the street to avoid me." The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was reverent. Then Luis spoke again. "I told you about the photo," he said. "But I didn't tell you the rest." Eugene tried to wave him off, but Luis continued, softly. "My uncle, the boy Eugene saved, he had a scar across his chest. He used to call it his second heart. Said every beat he got after that moment belonged to the man who carried him." Luis turned to the crowd. "And that man? He never asked for recognition. Never told the story himself. I had to hear it from others. Because he didn't think what he did was special." Eugene sighed. "I did what anyone should have." Luis nodded. "But not everyone does, Mr. Marshall. It was the first time he'd ever called Eugene that. Everyone in the diner noticed. Troy shuffled forward, hesitating like a child who knew a lecture was still coming but couldn't turn away. "If you ever wanted to talk," he said quietly, "maybe tell more of your story. I'd listen." Eugene gave a slow, almost smile. "Then maybe you should start by listening to the folks around you," he said. "There's stories all over this place. You just need ears. And humility." Troy gave a small nod. Reggie followed suit. "We shouldn't have said what we said. I know we were wrong. I don't know what else to say except, I'll do better." Darnell looked Eugene in the eyes for the first time. "We were stupid. And cruel. And we didn't even see it." Eugene looked at all three. "You saw it. You just didn't think it mattered." Behind them, the old man with the crutches tapped the floor once, hard. "Your generation's got all the tools," he said. "But none of the training. You can Google the whole world, but you still walk around blind." Even the younger customers, teenagers, college students, were nodding now. The girl with the notebook clutched it to her chest. The cook, Ramon, stepped closer, pointing a thick, flour-stained finger toward Eugene. "You saved my cousin. You wrote to my family. You gave us closure when no one else could. And you never once bragged about it. You let us carry that story like it was ours." Reggie's voice cracked. "We don't deserve to be forgiven." Eugene looked at him. "That's not your decision to make." Another pause. Then Luis spoke again. "You boys came in here to tear someone down. But you walked out with a lesson you'll carry for the rest of your life. If you're smart enough to hold on to it." Troy nodded, solemn. "I'm sorry, Mr. Marshall. Really. I mean it." Eugene nodded once. "Then show it. Not just with words. But with the way you carry yourself from this point forward." There was no applause. No dramatic music. Just silence. And growth. The boys turned toward the door. Nobody stopped them. Nobody needed to. They'd heard enough. And what mattered most now, was whether they'd remember. As the bell above the diner door jingled one final time, a quiet calm returned. Luis turned to Eugene. "You all right?" Eugene glanced out the window, where the sky had shifted into soft overcast. "I'm fine," he said. "Didn't plan on a history lesson today, but maybe life had other ideas." Lou's diner returned to its usual rhythm, coffee pouring, forks scraping plates, a soft buzz of conversation creeping back in. But it wasn't the same as before. Something invisible had changed. The air carried weight now, not the heavy kind, but the meaningful kind. The kind you feel deep in your chest and carry with you when you leave. Eugene sat in his booth, his pie mostly untouched. Marcy leaned down and offered to warm it up again. He shook his head gently. "No need," he said. "It's not about the pie today." Luis pulled up a chair across from him. For a moment, he just sat there quietly. Then he reached into his pocket and slid something across the table, a folded envelope. Eugene looked at it, eyebrows raised. "What's this?" "Something they left behind," Luis said. "Troy put it on the counter before he left. Said it wasn't for show." Eugene opened it slowly. Inside was a single page, handwritten in neat but shaky print. "I disrespected someone who deserves more than I can understand. I'm not asking for anything. Just hoping I can be better. TD." Eugene read it twice. He didn't smile. But he didn't scoff either. He folded the note and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "I've seen worse," he said. Luis let out a breath. "You think he meant it?" "I think he's got time to prove it," Eugene replied. Across the diner, the teenage girl, Hannah, the one with the notebook, stood up again. She hesitated near the jukebox, watching Eugene like someone watching a legend, not wanting to interrupt but not wanting to miss the chance either. He noticed. "You want to ask something?" he called, voice gentle. She nodded. "You said, you see faces when you look at your jacket. People who didn't make it. Can I ask, what keeps you from breaking under that weight?" Eugene leaned back, the old leather creaking beneath him. "That's the thing about weight," he said. "You don't carry it because it's easy. You carry it because somebody has to." Hannah swallowed hard. Then she sat back down and started scribbling. A man at the counter, mid-30s, flannel shirt, tired eyes, turned and said, "I'm bringing my son by next Sunday. He needs to meet you." Eugene gave a small wave. "Tell him to bring an appetite. I might even let him have the last slice." Laughter. Real this time. Warm, not nervous. Ramon peeked from the kitchen. "You want eggs on the house?" "Sure," Eugene said. "Might as well eat while I'm a local celebrity." Marcy smiled and brought over another cup of coffee, fresher this time. "Don't let it go to your head." Luis chuckled. "Too late. We're going to need velvet ropes around his booth." But Eugene just shook his head. "I don't want attention," he said. "I want awareness." Luis raised an eyebrow. "What's the difference?" "Attention comes and goes. Awareness sticks." A few booths over, a young couple sat whispering to each other. The woman had tears in her eyes. They weren't the only ones. Even the old man with the crutches, who hadn't moved since the boys left, finally leaned back and exhaled like he'd been holding something in for years. Eugene glanced around. "This world's too loud sometimes," he said. "Too fast. Too proud." Luis nodded. "So what do we do?" Eugene took a sip of coffee. Then he said something so simple it landed like gospel. "Slow down. Listen more. And remember what silence costs." For a while, nobody spoke. And that was okay. Because some silences aren't empty, they're full of truth. Later that week, Hannah posted Eugene's quote online, the one about silence and listening. It was short, but it struck a nerve. Teachers shared it. Churches printed it in bulletins. A veterans group put it on their homepage under a picture of Eugene that someone had snapped through the diner window. The post went viral. But Eugene didn't know. He didn't care. He spent the rest of his Sunday reading a worn book under the window light, then walking 2 blocks home to his quiet little house with the creaky porch. No fanfare. No cameras. Just peace. That night, Luis stayed late at the diner. Marcy cleaned the counter slower than usual. "You all right?" she asked him. "Just thinking," Luis said. "About Eugene?" "About all of it." Marcy poured him a cup of decaf. "We all saw what happened. What mattered was what we did after." Luis stared into his coffee. "I stayed quiet too long," he said. "Too many times in my life." Marcy nodded slowly. "We all have." The next morning, people were still talking about what had happened. Not just at Lou's, but across town. In barbershops, grocery stores, church parking lots. Not because someone yelled, but because someone stood tall without needing to. And that, more than anything else, had stuck with them. By Thursday, the story had outgrown Lou's diner. It was no longer just whispers in booths or quiet nods exchanged over coffee. It had moved into Bakersfield's bloodstream, through inboxes, text messages, late-night porch conversations. No one could quite explain why this story hit so hard. Maybe because it wasn't explosive. It was human. Eugene Marshall didn't know he had gone viral. He didn't even know what going viral meant. He had no social media. His phone flipped open with a creak, and when it buzzed, it was usually a pharmacy reminder or a church newsletter. But what he did notice, what couldn't escape him, was how people looked at him differently now. Not with pity. Not with discomfort. With recognition. At the local pharmacy, the teenage cashier stammered as he handed Eugene his receipt. "Sir, thank you. For everything." Eugene blinked. "I just came to pick up arthritis pills." The boy smiled nervously. "My mom told me what you said. She cried reading the post. I guess. I wanted to say you made us think." Eugene nodded, tucked the bag under his arm, and left. At the grocery store, a woman in scrubs handed him a folded card with no name, just a note inside that read, "You reminded me how powerful quiet strength can be. Thank you." And at the post office, a man in a denim jacket, early 50s, stepped aside in line and saluted Eugene. It was stiff and unpolished, but heartfelt. Eugene returned it with a gentle nod. "You serve?" "No sir," the man said. "But my father did. He'd want me to show respect." Eugene smiled faintly. "Then you just did." That following Sunday, before sunrise, Marcy arrived at the diner to open up and found something different. Eugene's booth, the one he always took, had a fresh linen napkin folded on the table. A small vase with a single white lily stood in the center. Louise had put it there. "Don't get used to flowers," Marcy teased when Eugene walked in later that morning. "You ain't royalty." Eugene glanced at the lily. "No," he said softly, "but there for someone who was." The crowd that Sunday wasn't just regulars. People came just to sit nearby. Some watched from afar. Others made quiet conversation. But nobody interrupted Eugene's meal. It wasn't about spectacle. It was about presence. Midway through his coffee, a man approached with a young boy no older than 9. "Mr. Marshall?" "Yes. I just wanted to thank you. My son saw your photo online. I used it to talk to him about what real strength looks like." Eugene looked down at the boy. "What's your name?" "Caleb," the boy said, nervously twisting the hem of his shirt. "You treat people right, Caleb." "I try," the boy nodded. "Keep doing that," Eugene said. "Trying's the whole point." The father shook Eugene's hand. Firm. Grateful. Then they left without fanfare. Just a quiet, respectful goodbye. Louise brought over the usual, black coffee, pie slightly burnt at the edges, but this time, he slid into the seat across from Eugene instead of walking away. "You all right?" he asked. Eugene nodded. "Seems like I started something I didn't mean to." Louise grinned. Maybe it was meant to start. They sat in companionable silence. Across the diner, Hannah, the teenager with the notebook, waved. Eugene gave a small wave back. "She's been coming in every day," Louise said. "Sits in the same spot. Writes in that notebook like it's her Bible. Says she wants to understand what it means to carry something heavy and still walk tall." Eugene chuckled. "Tell her to bring stronger shoes." That week, Louise quietly organized a small event, a veterans' breakfast at Lou's. Nothing grand. Just good pancakes, strong coffee, and better company. No signs. No press. Just an open door. Eugene showed up last. Of course he did. But when he walked in, every single person in the room, vets, family members, cooks, students, stood. Not because they were told to. Not because of etiquette. But because they wanted to. Even Troy was there. He stood near the back, no swagger, no backward hat, no speaker on his belt. He didn't speak. Just gave Eugene a nod when their eyes met. Eugene nodded back. Later, as the breakfast wound down, Troy quietly walked over and placed a folded envelope on Eugene's table. Then he left without a word. Inside was a second note. "I disrespected someone who carried the weight of more than I could ever understand. I can't undo what I said. But I can spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. No excuses. Just intention. Troy. Eugene folded the paper slowly and tucked it next to the first one in his jacket pocket. He didn't need to frame it. He didn't need to forgive him on the spot. The words were enough. And from that day on, there wasn't a Sunday where Eugene sat alone again. People came. Not to gawk. Not to worship. But to listen. To learn. To ask what it meant to lose everything, and still come back with a heart that hadn't turned to stone. And Eugene, who had once thought his story was just one more forgotten line in a long list of unspoken histories, realized something beautiful. His voice still mattered. And people were finally listening. A week later, Bakersfield High School prepared for its annual Veterans Day Assembly, a modest affair in most years, with a slideshow of stock images, a speech from the principal, and half-hearted applause from students itching to return to class. But this year was different. Mr. Langford, the senior history teacher, had heard about what happened at Lou's Diner. Not from the news. From Hannah, the girl with the notebook. She'd told him the story like it was a gospel she'd witnessed firsthand. She even showed him Eugene's quote, carefully written in blue ink on the last page of her spiral notebook. You don't have to go to war to be brave. Sometimes it's brave just to speak up when someone's being torn down. Langford read the words once, then twice more. And something in him shifted. He made a few calls. Reached out to a friend at City Hall. Called in a favor from a local veterans committee. By Friday morning, a guest chair had been placed front and center on the auditorium stage. It wasn't decorated. It wasn't announced. It was just, there. Eugene didn't say yes immediately. He didn't care for stages. Or microphones. Or applause. But when Hannah showed up at his front porch with a letter signed by 32 students, hand-scrawled notes in various colors and wildly inconsistent grammar, all asking him to come, he said yes. That morning, he dressed carefully. Wore the same jacket. Pressed his shirt. Polished his shoes. Not because he wanted to impress, but because it was what you did when you carried memory on your shoulders. He walked into the auditorium without help. And the moment he entered, the noise stopped. Students sat up straighter. Teachers leaned forward. The principal introduced him with a few short words, then stepped back. Eugene approached the mic slowly. Adjusted it. Looked out at rows of teenage faces, some bored, some curious, all watching. I don't have much to say, he began. But I have a few things worth hearing. The room held its breath. I wore this jacket in war. But it's not the war that defined me. It's what came after. He told them, softly, plainly, about coming home to a country that didn't welcome him. About losing his wife before he got to say goodbye. About carrying grief like an extra limb, one that never healed. He didn't cry. He didn't ask for pity. He just told the truth. And then he looked at the front row, where Hannah sat, notebook open on her lap, pen poised. You don't need a uniform to serve, he said. You don't need medals or titles to do the right thing. All it takes is attention. Listening. Speaking up when it's easier to stay quiet. A boy near the back lowered his phone. A girl near the front wiped away a tear. I didn't come here to be honored, Eugene said. I came here hoping you'd walk out of this room and remember one thing: you don't build respect by talking louder than everyone else. You build it by standing still when someone else needs support. He paused. Then stepped back from the mic. There was no applause at first, just silence. The kind that meant people were really thinking. Then it came. Slowly. Building. No cheers. Just clapping. Real. Steady. Afterward, Hannah approached, notebook in hand. Can I quote that last part? Eugene smiled gently. Only if you write it in pen. As he stepped outside, Luis was waiting in the parking lot. He opened the passenger door of his pickup. "You didn't tell me you were going to drop wisdom like a sermon," Luis said. Eugene chuckled. "Didn't plan to. Just came out." As they drove away, Eugene looked out the window. Across the street, 3 boys were waiting at the bus stop. Troy stood among them. He saw Eugene. Paused. Then raised a hand. No grin. No swagger. Just a simple wave. Eugene nodded once in return. No words were exchanged. But that nod. That was enough. Back at Lou's diner that evening, things were quiet again. Familiar. Safe. Marcy wiped down Eugene's booth with extra care. Luis flipped the sign to "closed," but left the door unlocked, just in case someone needed pie or wisdom after dark. And Eugene? He sat in his recliner at home. Tea in hand. Jacket folded neatly over the armrest. He hadn't changed. He didn't need to. Because the town had. That Sunday, when he returned to Lou's, the place didn't fall silent. It rose to its feet. Not because he asked. But because he earned it. And that's how the loudest voice in the room turned out to be the one that spoke quietly, with strength, with truth, and without ever needing to raise its tone. Eugene Marshall didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He didn't demand respect. He simply lived in a way that commanded it, through sacrifice, through humility, through unwavering grace. And in a world full of noise, he reminded us that sometimes the most powerful message is delivered in silence. As Eugene once said, "You don't build respect by talking louder than everyone else. You build it by standing still when someone else needs support." If this story moved you, even a little, don't let it end here. Speak up when others are silent. Listen when it's inconvenient. And honor those who carried the weight long before you noticed it. Subscribe to True Echo for more real, unforgettable stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us of the power of quiet truth. Comment below. Share this story. Because Eugene's voice deserves to echo far beyond one diner in Bakersfield.